market if you're in a business, but if you're an educator, it's adopted by people, by the institution. So the convergence of those three things, there's a real human need that's being met by a feasible solution that people are willing to use. That sweet spot is where innovation happens. And so whether we talk about design thinking, which has empathy as the first step, or human-centered design, which is just, I think, a reframing of design thinking, we're talking about this. And so, I think the first question that I wanted us to look at is, why is this a very important concept for educators today? And David Kelly, who's the founder of IDEO and also the founder of the design school at Stanford, he says, enabling people to gain innovation confidence is as important as gaining literacy skills. Now, you may or may not agree with this statement, but I think it's powerful. I think it gets us thinking that, yeah, in this fast-changing world, the ability to innovate is kind of the new literacy. And I don't think it's, one is more important than the other. I think you certainly need the basic literacy skills. But this idea of being, having confidence in your creativity is being seen as increasingly important. So that being said, I want to share with you a short video that kind of captures this sentiment. It's a 2-minute video, and it captures the context in which we live in. So hopefully this will work out. I'm going to play it from my computer. Okay, so are you seeing the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. One thing that I usually ask, and I'd love to, maybe if you just use the text box and just let me know, where are you taking this webinar from? Because this context, we're showing this video and you're coming from around the world. I'd love to get a sense of where in the world you're sitting. So just take a second in the text box to type in where you're actually taking this from. Central Missouri, Nairobi, Oregon, San Jose, Costa Rica, Florida. Anyone else? Okay, so wow, so really quite quite a variety of locations. I'm not surprised. And I think one thing that I want to be conscious of is not everyone is living necessarily the same reality, but to a large extent, some of these forces that the video is referring to is in fact shaping us as I would say a human family. So there is a shared context. And clearly all of us here, even though we're joining from all these different countries, are this is a web-enabled platform that's allowing us to come together. So it's you know, part of what we're experiencing in this webinar is part of what the video is talking about. So that's the context we live in. And here I want to just put up a quote from, or this is a slide from Howard Gardner, who's at Harvard University, and he's written multiple books on from an education point of view, from a psychology point of view. But one of his recent books is called The 5 Minds of the Future. Some of you may be familiar with it, but one of the minds that he talks about is the creative mind. And he says the creative mind ventures regularly into unexplored territory. And so these 5 minds of the future is something that we touch upon more deeply in the course, but just kind of wanted to share with you from different perspectives, the importance of nurturing an innovative mindset. And so what is human-centered design? It really encourages creative thinking in trying to solve complex problems. And I want to here just kind of give you a graphic of the 5 steps, and these are iterative steps, so I'll go through that. So it starts with empathy. And even though that might sound obvious, we very, very often skip the step, assume that we know what the problem is, which is the define. Definition is what is the problem we're trying to solve. Ideate is generating a lot of possible solutions for the problem. And then prototype is just this idea of before we actually go out and say we have the solution, how can we test it? Because what we think might work may not actually work. So prototyping comes from you know, the toolkit of designers. If you're going to build a big building, you can't afford to have that structure collapse. You have to build a prototype, something that is at a much lower cost, that allows you to see that does it work before you actually build the real thing. So bringing the concept of prototyping to education or to other spheres. How can we test the solution before we invest a lot of resources in building it? So once you have the prototype and you test it, you get some feedback and you go back to any of the earlier steps. So really that is the human-centered design process on a slide. And what I want to do now is you know, maybe just run through each of the 5 steps, and I'll give you an example that we actually faced at the University for Peace. So empathy is understanding the user experience. And the problem that we were facing at UP, so we run, the Center for Executive Education runs short courses and workshops, online programs and customized programs for universities. But then we also have our master's programs. And these are, we have, at the end of every course, we have a feedback form, which we would give our students and ask them, you know, to really take some time to give us feedback on the course, what worked well, what they would recommend. And we were finding that we were getting students would hand it in because they were pretty much a captive audience, but we were not getting a whole lot of feedback. And then we would hear on the side that they had a lot more to say about the course. So, you know, the assumption there is that, these students really don't want to make the time and effort to give us the feedback. It became a frustration for faculty that we weren't getting feedback. And so the problem that we were trying to solve, we hadn't defined it as, our problem was that we have, I would say, apathetic students when it comes to giving feedback. So really the process, when we started talking to students, when we did the empathy, And it took us years before we actually made this most obvious step, is like, what's going on? We know that you care more than we're seeing on the forms. The feedback we got is they're usually exhausted at the end of that final class. There's usually a final presentation, or they've stayed up all night to finish the final paper. So it's the worst time for them. Yes, they have a lot to say, but they just want to, you know, kind of get out and go for lunch or whatever the next thing is. They're exhausted. So it's not like they're apathetic. It's just the timing is off. And so our problem then became, the definition of our problem was, well, if we let them go, they're no longer this captive audience. How do we then create a system where we still get a high level of feedback, but it's after the fact, right? So the problem changed as from why do we have apathetic students to how do we time a mechanism to get feedback. And you know, I think the ideation brainstorm was lacking. We came up with, I'd say, 3 or 4 different alternatives. The one that we went with is we gave them a week-long period. So we put it online and gave them a week-long period where they could get us the feedback, and we made it a requirement for finishing the course, right? So a little bit of the kind of stick approach to doing this. It wasn't an incentive to go beyond, you know, anything. So again, the ideation and brainstorming, they might actually be, when we do this in groups, I challenge the group that for any problem, to come up with at least 20 possible solutions before trying to narrow down as to which one you'd like to try and go forward with. And I'm going to talk a little bit about brainstorming because I think it is a critical step in this process, is really thinking broadly before narrowing in on a solution. And then the prototype I've talked about, it's just this idea, as I think educators, we're very good at talking and describing our ideas, but people often react emotionally at a completely different level when they experience something. So a prototype, you know, in this particular case, the prototype looked like trying it with one group, right? Before we rolled it across campus. But I think to me, a prototype often kicks in when you're trying to sell an idea to somebody, when you're trying to share with, maybe if you're in a university and you need the approval of somebody else, how can you convince them that this idea needs to be scaled out? And how can you create, so the prototype, to me, the question is, how can you go beyond telling somebody about the idea and actually have them experience it in a small way? Maybe it's a video of another institution doing it. Maybe it's a little role play where they pretend they're the student and you show how your new approach is going to impact the student. So be creative in the prototype. Sometimes the prototype is just a drawing. But the whole idea of prototyping is give them a taste of what your solution is going to look like. And taste it for yourself. And again, depending on whether you're trying to get permission or trying to get feedback, people react emotionally to a prototype in a completely different way. And then the last step of the human-centered design process is, so what happened, right? What happened with your prototype? What was the reaction? Did it work? Did it not work? The whole idea of failure, you know, we talk a lot about failure in social entrepreneurship. But in education, I still think of education as a culture where failure is somewhat stigmatized, right? It's you got it wrong. And in the culture of human-centered design, failure means you tried something original. Failure means if you failed, by definition, you somehow got out of your comfort zone. You did something that was slightly different or new. And so when you fail at something, it's feedback that you tried something new. And of course, the goal is not to fail in itself. The goal is to then reflect on, well, what do I need to do differently? Right? I mean, so it's again, failure is not just part of the process. It's not the goal, but to reflect on what went well, what did you learn from it, and to iterate. Iterate is just to go back and then maybe you pick another prototype, or maybe you really didn't empathize enough. Maybe the problem definition, it's a different problem from the one you want to solve. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you in terms of human-centered design. And actually, before I go to the next slide, let me pause and see if there are any comments, questions, thoughts. Again, I realize there's fairly short time to run through a topic that has a lot of depth in it. I will share with you other places where you can go for a design thinking, or it's called a human-centered design toolkit. But let me pause here and see if there are any comments or questions. And you can speak into the mic, or you can type a question, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Yeah, I see somebody. I see someone talking, but I don't hear them. Yeah. Hannah, do you know if she has her mic enabled?
It's Heather here.
Do you?
It looks like you're on mute.
Oh. I wonder if
you want to try typing into the chat box, Heather?
Sorry about that. It's worked in previous times. Sorry, I'm just going to everything. I'm just transporting. Yes. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, yes, any 5-step process loses meaning until you apply it and try it. And so thanks, Heather. Glad that at one level it's making sense. And I do encourage you then to do what you're doing, which is, you know, and to all of you, I mean, I don't know all your backgrounds. I'm assuming some of you are educators, formal educators, but this process really has wide kind of application. So you could apply it to your personal life too. You know, my teenager, well, I have a 10-year-old, my 10-year-old doesn't seem to tell me what happened during her day when I ask her, how was school? Great. Well, how could I use human-centered design, right? How can I step into the shoes of my 10-year-old and she's getting asked the same question every day by dad, how was your day? Great. What does she really want to be asked, rather than, because my conclusion is she's not interested in talking to me, versus maybe I should be asking a different question in a different way. So these 5 steps work across a range of I would say industries and personal to professional. Please go ahead, and as you have comments or thoughts, please feel free to share them. So one thing that I wanted to kind of capture, I talked about the importance of brainstorming, and often when we get into a committee or a group and we have a problem, we come up with like 3 different solutions, and we already know 2 of them won't work, so we go to the 3rd one, and we felt that there was brainstorming. Brainstorming, IDEO, the design firm in Silicon Valley that really has helped popularize design thinking and human-centered design. They have these 6 rules of brainstorming, or guidelines, and they have them actually posted up on their walls. It's so important to them to create that culture where brainstorming can take place. And so I'm just going to go through them. Encourage wild ideas. You know, often an idea that sounds wild with some tweaking is something that you actually go forward with. There's so many stories, you know, the first computer mouse was a wild idea, or ski goggles that don't fog. So this, how can you put off your blinders when you're brainstorming? What's that wild idea? Build on the ideas of others. So if Heather says, oh, let's solve the problem about students not giving feedback by bringing in a big chocolate chip cookie. You're saying that they're tired. Well, let's give them chocolate. And then instead of saying, oh no, but some people are allergic to chocolate or whatever, that's shutting down Heather's idea. Building on the idea of others with, let's get chocolate and chip cookie and coffee, right? Like that's building. And then it just creates a different environment. Maybe we won't go with that, but it's the idea of I back the idea and I yes and it, yes and. So brainstorming has that yes and kind of approach. You go for quantity. I challenge my groups to come up with at least 20 or 30 ideas in 10, 15 minutes before. It doesn't matter how much time you have. You have to, I encourage them to at least go for 20 ideas before we start narrowing it down. This idea of staying focused on topics, when you get that kind of energy, sometimes people go off topic. So just the idea, hey, we're brainstorming about this issue. We can brainstorm about another issue in another session. Don't judge the idea. That goes with building on the idea of others. The opposite of building on the idea of others is saying no, but this won't work. Well, you're not only are you shutting down that person, but you're kind of influencing the environment. Is I'm going to be judged. I don't want to throw out my wild idea anymore. Somebody just said no, but. So don't judge the idea. In fact, IDEO has a little bell when they're brainstorming and somebody says, oh, but that won't work, because they ring the bell because they broke one of the guidelines. And one conversation at a time. Again, when you're brainstorming in a true brainstorming fashion, people get very excited. If you have 2 or 3 people talking at a time, as we know, nothing gets heard. So it helps if somebody's in charge of process, or helps keep the process going. So simple. I usually, when I do brainstorming, kind of go over these guidelines with the group, even if we've done it before. It's just it's a great reminder. So, part of this idea of coming up with a lot of ideas is this whole process, this 5-step process we saw. It's really uses the whole brain, and you're constantly either in this creative mode, where you're creating different choices, you're talking to people, you're gathering data, but then you have to make decisions, right? And so it goes from creative to analytical, where it says converge. If you come up with 30 ideas of how you could go forward, you then have to start saying, no, this won't work because, no, this won't work because, let's go forward with this one. Usually time and money are constraints. So what's the environment in which you're in, and which idea can you actually move forward with? That's going to be an analytical process. Again, I think one of the things that I've noticed in these processes is trying to keep ego out of it. Not whose idea was this? Oh, I'm voting for Heather's idea. Like, how can I not vote for Heather's idea? Maybe I can put a Post-it on the idea that was on the wall, and I don't know who put it up, right? So that de-emphasizes the person and emphasizes a process where we're trying to co-create something. So, that being said, I see human-centered design as much as kind of a process, as a mindset. So yes, there is some value in that process, but it's also a mindset of collaboration, of creativity, of can do, of yes, and of every problem has a solution. And I find that that's what makes it, for me, something that I'm so passionate about. So just to review this one slide, starting with empathy, which we often skip. We often think we know what the issue is, but we haven't spent enough time talking to, whether it's our customer, our student, our client, the end user, whatever you want to call the person who's the beneficiary. So, empathize, then see if it's really the problem you thought it was. So come back and define what is the problem you're trying to solve. Ideate. In our class, we have people pair up to do some of the ideation, right? Because by definition, you're limited to your own experiences and skill set. How can you collaborate? Usually that's critical in the brainstorming ideation mode. And then narrow it down. What do you want to try and prototype? What's the feedback you get when you test it, and then where do you go back in the loop? So that's the process. And in terms of just in conclusion, I thought just kind of giving you that mindset. So the mindset is captured by this quote. In truth, we have far more creative potential waiting to be tapped. Firm believer. Tom Kelly. I'm forgetting if it was Tom or Dave, but one of them has this very powerful TED talk, but he tells his story. He was diagnosed with cancer and not given a whole lot of time. And he talks about part of his motivation to live and continue to do his work is just helping people rediscover their creative confidence. And unfortunately, a lot of education systems, the one I went through in India certainly did that. It kind of knocks your creative confidence out of you. So part of this process is helping people reconnect with the fact that we're all creative. We just have to give ourselves that permission to take some of those creative risks, because that's how new ideas get created. So that's what I wanted to share with you in the short time that I have. I also want you to be able to reflect, Heather, what you started doing. Is all of this only becomes memorable if you can apply it. So I want you to think about a problem that you're currently facing in your organization, at your workplace, and think about those steps of human-centered design, and can you reframe that problem as a design challenge or as a design opportunity? Have you done the empathy piece? How could you do the empathy piece? What information might that give you? So please do take that step. Otherwise, it becomes a lecture. And so I did say that I would share with you some resources where you can go for more. And Hannah will email out the PowerPoint to everyone. But Design Thinking for Educators specifically has a lot of applications for educators. There's the Design Kit from IDEO.org. IDEO.com was the original company. They launched a nonprofit because they found that this process was so valuable to social entrepreneurs, social enterprises, public education, and other spheres. And then the Stanford Design School that runs workshops and has webinars too, sometimes on these topics. Their 3-day workshop costs 10 times more than our 3-day workshops. So I would say come to Costa Rica and do it with us instead of doing it with Stanford. So I think that's it. Maybe just a last thought. Just give yourself that permission to move forward with your ideas and impact people positively while enjoying the journey. I think that's something. I wrote a blog post about that. I'm very interested in positive psychology, happiness, but that's part of it, is giving yourself that permission to do something you think is important and fail along the way, and try again and make a positive impact. So Hannah, thanks so much for this opportunity. Back to you.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. I think at this point, I'm going to go into some of the specifics about the online course. It's called Educating in Changing Times. Do you want to move to the next slide, Mohit?
I may not have, can you share your screen?
Okay. Yeah, let me share my screen here.
Okay.
Give me 1 second here.
The other option, I think I've just downloaded something. Maybe if can you still see it? Can you see my screen? Okay, yes. Sorry about that. Okay.
You can see that. Okay, perfect. So Educating in Changing Times is a 4-week online course that we offer here, of which human-centered design is a critical part to kind of address some of the challenges that educators are facing in today's society in light of information flow and advancing technology, and the fact that you can get any piece of information at the tip of your fingers. So this is kind of causing challenges that both teachers and students alike have not faced in the past. Our next session will be coming up in about 1 week on Wednesday, June 1st. And the central question that the course really tries to answer is, what will be important for your student or your audience to know, value, and be able to do in a future that's hard to visualize, which is somewhat what the video that Mohit showed speaks to. There's so much unknown about the future, and yet in 2002, if we had known that social media strategist was going to be one of the top jobs, kind of what we would have taught our students then. So the course is designed to help those in the field of education, both informally and formally. There's a very easy to use online platform that has a new module for each week, where you see steps that you should complete to complete the module for the week. There are a ton of materials, readings, webinars, videos, articles to review. And basically, one of the perks of our online program is that there is a huge interaction component, both with the professor and with your peers. So to move to the next slide, just kind of some overall benefits that you would leave with after this course. The first one's somewhat obvious, the knowledge and practical skills to implement tools and find solutions to some of these challenges within your home environment. You also will receive a certificate at the end of the course from the UN-mandated University for Peace, which is a great resume builder. A lot of people put it on their CV, put it on LinkedIn, or any other place where they want to showcase their professional development and individual growth. And then the last thing, very important thing, I believe, is the global environment of our courses. So it's not uncommon to have someone from Kenya, someone from Nigeria, someone from Australia, someone from the US, all in your classroom, which makes for a very enriching experience and a really great networking experience for everyone, both in the short term during the class and afterwards. We find that a lot of